Thank you, Senator. The gentleman reserves. Does any member claim time in opposition?
Mr. Chair, I rise and to claim time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentle lady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, Mrs. Chair, Madam Chair, pardon me. The funds in this bill, especially those funds for the Army Corps of Engineers and the Coast Guard, are specifically for repairing storm damage in our communities. The agencies have identified specific projects and calculated estimates to bring our infrastructure and agency assets back to full operation. Not a single paragraph in the bill before us includes funds for a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. Yet this amendment restricts funds for this purpose. My colleagues, this amendment walks away from all the good work Chairman Lowy tried to do for the Corps and the Coast Guard and blocks the necessary border investments required in a final compromise. Unfortunately, this amendment will be viewed by many of my colleagues as a poison pill. It ignores investments that those on my side of the aisle believe are necessary to fund a way forward that will provide disaster funds, address the border crisis, and reopen the government. I urge a no vote on this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves.
Madam Speaker, can I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a letter to the President from the Texas delegation objecting to using disaster money for the border wall? These individuals support the wall. I assume most of them do, but they don't support the President's promise that he might use executive powers to go into disaster money to pay for the border wall.
The gentleman's request will be reserved by general leave.
Madam Speaker, I'm happy to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Escobar.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you for yielding, Chairman McGovern, and thank you for offering this amendment. Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of Amendment Number 2, which would prevent funds in the underlying bill made available for the Army Corps of Engineers or the Department of Homeland Security from being used for the planning, development, or construction of any new physical barrier along the southwest border. Sadly, this amendment is necessary because this administration wants to divert critical disaster relief funds meant for other projects, to go toward border wall construction. The reality is that our country needs help recovering from some of the greatest natural disasters that we've seen in our lifetime. Let's ensure that our nation has the necessary tools to recover, rebuild, and mitigate future natural disasters. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and to hold this administration accountable and ensure that they do not deceive the American people by pulling a bait and switch. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Can I ask the gentlelady from Texas how many more speakers she has?
The gentlelady from
Texas. I have no further speakers.
No, Madam Speaker, how much time do I have remaining?
You have 1 1/2 minutes.
So, Madam Speaker, I want to thank Representatives Velasquez, Hastings, Torres, Jackson-Lee, Jayapal, Pocan, and Escobar for co-sponsoring this amendment with me. This is not about whether or not you believe a border wall is necessary or not. I don't believe it is. Some of my friends on the other side believe it is. But when the President said he was going to declare an emergency and dip into emergency funds, disaster funds that are dedicated to helping people deal with real disasters to pay for this wall, that set off alarm bells here. And so no matter what side you are on this border wall issue, you should support this amendment, because this President and no President should dip into disaster relief money to use it for something different than what Congress intended. The people who this money is aimed at helping are not interested in building a wall. They're interested in rebuilding their homes. Let us not put these monies in jeopardy. Let's have a bipartisan moment where we all can agree that the disaster money ought to be disaster money, period. And with that, Madam Speaker, I urge a strong vote in favor of this amendment, and I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Texas.
Madam Chair, I urge a no vote on this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
I ask for a carded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts will be postponed. So now the order to consider amendment number 3, printed in Part B of House Report 116-2. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of my amendment.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-2, offered by Mr. Rice of South Carolina.
Pursuant to House Resolution 43, the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Rice, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of my amendment, a common sense fix that gives the HUD the flexibility to waive redundant and unnecessary environmental requirements that slow down the disaster recovery process. Anyone from a district that has endured one of these devastating hurricanes, wildfires, or floods can attest to the fact that Congress should do everything in our power to quickly give these communities relief. Madam Speaker, 3 years ago, South Carolina was struck by Hurricane Matthew. As a result of that storm, South Carolina was awarded $95 million, which was to be used to repair the households of 1,300 indigent families. The 3 counties that were most affected were 3 of the very poorest counties in South Carolina, Marion, Dillon, and Marlboro. And 2 years and 6 months later, about $25 million of that $95 million has been spent. About 400 of those houses have been repaired, which leaves about 1,000 South Carolina families, indigent families, people who had nothing to begin with, either out of their homes or living in substandard, mold-infested housing that could burn down from electrical problems, or the flooring is buckled, and so forth. We have to do better. Why does it take so long? Why does it take 2.5 years to get these people back in their homes? What I want to do, what my amendment does, is remove some of the burdensome federal requirements that stand in the way of delivering the relief that the federal government has offered up money to pay for. Now we come to Hurricane Florence. Hurricane Florence parked on top of my district in the southern part of North Carolina for 3 days in September and dumped over 40 inches of rain in places. And then when the storm finally did leave, for the next 2 weeks, the rivers rose and people were driven from their homes. 16,000 houses in my district were damaged. 12,000 of those houses had what they called moderate damage, which in their definition means that the house had water inside of the house, but it was less than 2 feet deep. Since the first major hurricane hit my district, I've been in constant contact with all federal and state agencies involved in the recovery rebuilding process. I frequently visit homes that are under construction and check with my constituents to ensure the process is going smoothly. With respect to Matthew from 2.5 years ago, almost 1,000 of my constituents are still not in their homes. My top question is, why is this taking so long, and what can we do to fix it? Part of their answer is reforming the long, expensive, and redundant environmental review process. Currently, before a home is being rebuilt with HUD funds, the South Carolina Disaster Recovery Office must conduct 2 environmental assessments. After completing a county-wide assessment, every single home that is eligible to be repaired with HUD funds must undergo a second assessment, no matter the size or type of repair that they are using the HUD dollars to complete. For example, if someone is using FEMA funds to repair a hole in the roof, the contractor can repair the hole without the homeowner having to complete an environmental study. However, if a home is being repaired using HUD funding, a costly and time-consuming environmental assessment must be completed before even the most minor of repairs can be made to the home. This onerous regulatory requirement is just one more roadblock that my constituents face in the recovery process. And I tell you again, the counties that were affected by this storm most severely are the poorest counties in South Carolina. Majority African American, these people never had anything to begin with, and whatever they have had has been taken away from them, and they need relief, and they don't need federal regulatory roadblocks. Bringing the regulations that apply to HUD in line with other federal agencies will create a more streamlined process and ensure the federal dollars are put to use in a more prompt fashion. We need to cut down the time and the cost that are preventing people in my district from getting back in their homes, back to normal, and on with their lives, and this practical amendment will do just exactly that. And Mr. Speaker, Mrs. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I'm sorry, I have to reiterate that the House Republicans passed this disaster package in December, and here we come. The Democratic majority has put it back up, but has subjected it to reopening the government and has made that a poison pill, which will make it impossible to be passed in this House. Certainly passed, it will not pass the Senate, and the Senate President will not sign it even if we pass it in this House. So I urge
the gentleman's
time has expired. And I urge the Democratic majority to stop playing politics with disaster recovery funds. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, the National Environment Policy Act was first enacted in 1970, and since then it has ensured that new projects comply with environmental standards that protect both human health and the environment. It's unwise and unnecessary to waive these requirements as we undertake disaster recovery. This amendment is particularly troubling when we consider that the loss of wetlands has actually contributed heavily to an increase in coastal flooding from hurricanes. A 2017 study led by the University of California, Santa Cruz showed a strong correlation between wetland cover and reduced property damage. The study estimated that wetlands in New York and New Jersey prevented $500 million in flood-related damage. So our public policy should aim to reduce the impacts of future disasters, which is why this bill contains more than $800 million in mitigation funding. To allow the Secretary to waive environmental requirements would undermine the principle that disaster recovery efforts should ensure communities are in a better position to withstand future natural disasters. Also, many disaster recovery projects involve multiple federal funding sources. This provision actually could slow down recovery efforts, since HUD's environmental standards would no longer match those of other federal agencies. If we're going to get serious about mitigating the effects of climate change and the impacts of natural disasters, we need a robust environmental framework. And for 49 years, NEPA has provided that guidance. This bill is not the place to discard decades of environmental protections. Vote no on the amendment. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question on the amendment offered by the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Rice. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 4, printed in Part B of House Report 116-2. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
I rise in support of my amendment.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in Part B of House Report 116-2, offered by Ms. Velasquez of New York.
Pursuant to House Resolution 43, the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Velasquez, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from New York.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of my amendment, which I believe will make meaningful strides to help alleviate problems of poverty and hunger in Puerto Rico. Unlike the states, Puerto Rico has been forced to work with the limited NAP block grant since 1982. This has led to a systemic underfunding of the nutritional needs of these American citizens for nearly 4 decades. Sadly, with a severely restricted budget resulting in reduced benefits and eligibility on the island, we're leaving thousands of families hungry every day. Already tragic, these problems were made worse when Hurricanes Irma and Maria made landfall. Puerto Rico was devastated, leaving a large share of the population out of work and unable to meet their basic needs. In the years since the immediate aftermath, the island is still suffering. Poverty levels have risen dramatically, and the economy continues struggling. 60% of the children in Puerto Rico live in poverty. This has meant an increase in the share of individuals who would otherwise be eligible for NAP, except for the fact that the program is capped. NAP is simply incapable of meeting the needs of Puerto Ricans, particularly given the current circumstances resulting from the disaster. The underlying bill we are debating today will provide Puerto Rico with an additional $600 million for disaster food assistance. I want to thank the chairwoman for including this critically needed funding. This funding and previously appropriated disaster resources address 2 critical needs in Puerto Rico. First, it is providing NAP recipients with a bit more support to feed their families. Second, it aids an additional 200,000 people who lost their jobs and homes. However, I believe Maria and Irma taught us some painful lessons with regards to nutritional support in Puerto Rico. We should be evaluating the benefits that adequate nutritional assistance has on the Puerto Ricans' health and economy. My amendment will provide up to $5 million to support the Commonwealth in conducting such a study. This will be an independent analysis that includes a survey of NAP participants on the island and fully investigates the impact disaster nutrition assistance has on the food security, health status, and well-being of the people of Puerto Rico. I should note that the USDA conducted similar studies for the SNAP program that operates in 53 jurisdictions during and after the Great Recession. It is my hope that this analysis will provide Congress with additional insight and tools to further reduce poverty, hunger, and hardship on the island. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. Does any member claim time in opposition? The gentlelady from New York.
Well, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from New York. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 5, printed in Part B of House Report 116-2. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
I rise to offer my amendment number 5.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 5, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-2, offered by Ms. Velasquez of New York.
Pursuant to House Resolution 43, the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Velasquez, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from New York.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to discuss an environmental and humanitarian crisis affecting the people of San Juan. For decades, Caño Martín Peña has been a repository for sewage overflow, mercury, and PCBs. The Caño Martín Peña was once a navigable and commercially used channel. Today, it's so clogged that it is possible to walk across it on some parts. Due to the clogging, the approximately 25,000 U.S. citizens who live near the Caño Martín Peña face significant public health and safety challenges. Combined storm water and the regional sewer system contribute to high concentration of coliforms in the channel. Frequent flooding is a constant risk that can put residents into direct contact with polluted water. Exposure to these polluted waters cause elevated risk of gastrointestinal diseases and a higher prevalence of chronic diseases and asthma. Sadly, we often see this ailment in children 5 years old and younger. Those who reside near the canal live in constant fear that the next rainfall could become a major flood, dumping raw sewage into homes, schools, and businesses. After the 2017 hurricanes, which exacerbated the Caño Martín Peña crisis with greater flooding, the communities that live near the 3.7 miles of this channel need our help more than ever. Because of the hurricanes, more than 1,200 families partially or totally lost the roofs of their homes, and 70% of the community flooded with wastewater in the immediate aftermath. These are the working people of San Juan, with one of the highest labor participation rates in the island. All they want is to be able to raise their families in safe and healthy communities. If we are ever to bring justice to these afflicted communities, we must dredge this canal and work toward its long-term remediation. Puerto Rico has spent millions of dollars attending to this problem, but without additional federal funds, this project will stall. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is ready to initiate construction as soon as federal funding is made available. My amendment will jumpstart the most important flood mitigation project for Puerto Rico, assuring the resiliency of critical infrastructure and doing justice to the working families living in this vulnerable area. Mr. Speaker, this is not only an environmental project, but a pressing issue of social and environmental justice. The people who live along this troubled canal have suffered long enough, but Maria and Irma underscore how quickly these problems can worsen with extreme weather. We have an obligation to act before the next hurricane or flood. I have been there and seen with my own eyes the devastation and hardship caused by this ecological disaster. I have seen the children wading in contaminated waters after every heavy rainstorm. I ask my colleagues, join me in helping Puerto Rico by voting in support of this amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. Is there a member claiming in opposition?
Chair,
For what purpose does the gentleman
Madam
rise?
Chairwoman, I claim time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
First, I'd like to assure my colleague that I am not opposed to the project she is trying to fund. I am aware of the project and its importance to Puerto Rico. In a different context, I could support it. In fact, as the previous chairman of the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee, I have worked with colleagues on both sides of the aisle to provide funding for ecosystem restoration projects well above the annual budget requests. What I am opposed to is funding the ecosystem restoration projects in a disaster supplemental appropriation bill. A disaster supplemental is not simply a chance to clear the Army Corps of Engineers construction backlog. That is what the annual appropriations process is for. A disaster supplemental is intended to protect storm-ravaged areas against future storms and to reduce federal liabilities from future storms. That's why the underlying bill is consistent with previous disaster bills and limits funding to projects that provide real benefits for that type, namely flood and storm damage reduction projects. Additionally, I would be remiss if I did not point out that the particular project of interest would not even be eligible for funding under this amendment. The underlying bill restricts construction funding to areas impacted by various storms, none of which
impacted Puerto Rico. We should not raise hopes knowing the project isn't even eligible. While I'm happy to offer to work with my colleague and try to support the project through the regular appropriation process, which I'm sure the new Chairwoman Capter is willing to do also, I must oppose funding in a disaster supplemental appropriation bill for ecosystem restoration projects. Therefore, I oppose the amendment and urge my colleagues to vote no and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from New York.
I yield 1 minute to the gentle lady from Ohio, Ms. Capter.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, and I want to thank Congresswoman Velasquez for her daunting and unparalleled leadership in trying to help the people of Puerto Rico, and I want to thank our very distinguished ranking member for his interest in helping to solve the real challenge of Cano Martin Peña. And I have to say to the people of Puerto Rico and our fellow citizens, those who reside in Puerto Rico and those who reside stateside here, we are very aware from Congresswoman Velasquez's work how devastated Puerto Rico is, and she has spent so much of her substance in trying to educate the membership here. We are very fortunate for her abiding leadership. And we all need to stand up for the residents of Puerto Rico, and I appreciate her work and all of our colleagues' efforts to do just that. I am committed to working with her to address any issues with this amendment as we move forward. Its intent is absolutely on point, and I think that working together on a bipartisan basis, we can find a way to help heal our fellow citizens in Puerto Rico and bring a better way of life there in the future. So I yield back.
The gentlewoman's time is expired. The gentleman from Idaho.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I would just say again, voting for this amendment, it doesn't really matter whether you vote for this amendment or not, because it doesn't really do anything, because the project is not eligible. What we are doing by adopting this amendment is raising false hopes, knowing that the project isn't even eligible. I would encourage the gentlewoman to withdraw the amendment and work with us to see that we can fund this through the regular appropriation process. And with that, I would encourage a no vote on the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from New York. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 6, printed in Part B of House Report 116-2. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
I rise to offer my amendment on the floor.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 6, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-2, offered by Mr. Stewart of Utah.
Pursuant to House Resolution 43, the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Stewart, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Utah.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank Mr. McGovern of the Rules Committee for making this vital amendment in order. The base text of the Supplemental Appropriations Acts of 2019 provided critical relief for natural disasters that have recently plagued our nation. The supplemental is necessary and it is needed, but we do have a problem, and it's a problem that we have to fix. The Interior West and, for example, my home state of Utah have largely been ignored. My amendment seeks to rectify this and seeks to increase funding for the West address the impacts of ongoing drought and something that we're all aware of, the catastrophic wildfires that we've been experiencing. The amendment provides increased funding for hazardous fuel management activities in the hopes of doing 3 things. First, to increase the resiliency of our forest. Second, to protect against future catastrophic fires. And third, to reduce the amount of damage caused by these fires. Like many Western states, and as I mentioned, my home state of Utah, we suffered a devastating fire season that burned countless acres and threatened life and property. And now we're left with the scars of these burns, and that can be almost as damaging with flooding, mudslides, and threats to water supplies. If adopted, my amendment will not only help mitigate the losses from past fires, but it will help to create future resiliency in our forests and lessen the devastating aftermath. The simple fact is, we can do better. We can actively manage our forests by combating undergrowth and disease and insect infestation. The Forest Service estimates that my home state of Utah has something like 436 million dead trees that are just waiting to burn. If this is not a threat, I don't know what is. And I would like now to yield my time to my friend, Ms. McCollum, the Madam Chairwoman of the Interior Subcommittee.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thank the gentleman for the time. As I pointed out earlier, the supplemental includes $824 million for the U.S. Forest Service to help California and those who have been impacted by wildfires and hurricanes Florence and Michael to recover. Now, while the funding includes $27 million for hazardous fuel, I support the gentleman's proposal to increase this amount because we know we have a lot of work to do in fuel reduction. But I'd also like to point out to the gentleman, I also support the continuing resolution portion of this legislation in front of us today because we need to reopen the Forest Service so we can use these funds. I thank the gentleman for the time, and I yield his time back to him. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The gentleman.
Thank you, and I yield.
The gentleman yields. Does any member claim time in opposition? Hearing none, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Utah. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 16, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Utah will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 7, printed in Part B of House Report 116-2. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Does the gentleman have an amendment?
I do. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 7, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-2, offered by Mr. Thompson of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 43, the gentleman from California, Mr. Thompson, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield myself as much time as I may consume. I appreciate the opportunity to speak in support of my proposed amendment. Over the past 2 years, communities across my district and throughout the state of California have been devastated by some of the biggest, deadliest, and most damaging wildfires in history. These disasters have catastrophic consequences for our agricultural communities. Wildfires can and do incinerate entire fields of crops, but they also pose a threat of smoke contamination, exposure to high levels of smoke, which damages crops beyond save. While smoke damage can affect a range of crops, wine grapes are particularly vulnerable. I've heard from dozens of my constituents who are facing the loss of their crop as their grapes are rejected due to this smoke damage. I want to thank the Appropriations Committee and their staff for working with me to ensure that grape growers like those in my district are supported. However, many wine grape growers do not discover smoke damage until after removing their fruit from the vine. These growers sustain heavy losses and deserve support. They should not be penalized simply because the damage to their grapes was discovered after the harvest. My amendment would clarify that assistance offered under H.R. 268 is available to growers who discover smoke damage after removing their grapes from the vine. This situation is tragic and far too common, and this clarification is needed to ensure that growers like those in my district receive the support that they deserve. Mr. Chairman, Madam Speaker, I want to reiterate my thanks to the Appropriations Committee and their staff, and I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. Does a member claim time in opposition to the amendment? Hearing none, the chair recognizes. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Thank you. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 8, printed in Part B of House Report 116-2. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 8, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-2, offered by Mr. Thompson of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 43, the gentleman from California, Mr. Thompson, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield myself as much time as I may consume, and I rise in support of Amendment Number 8, which provides an additional $50 million in community development funds for the 2017 federally declared disasters. In October 2017, my district experienced, at that time, the most devastating fires in the history of California. The October 2017 wildfires devastated nearly 300,000 acres in California, destroyed some 7,000 homes, caused billions of dollars in damage, burned to the ground many businesses, and most sadly, took the lives of 44 people. In response to these fires, Congress enacted legislation that delivered California Community Development Block Grant disaster relief funding to address unmet needs and mitigation against future disasters. As communities in my district continue the long and hard process of rebuilding, we are finding that the unmet needs are greater than the federal relief provided. Local inspections of residents damaged or destroyed in the October 17 fires indicate that FEMA's individual assistance inspection process significantly underestimated the number of homes damaged or destroyed in Santa Rosa, one of the cities in my district, by a difference of nearly 2,900 homes. Because the FEMA IA data may have informed HUD's initial allocation to the state of California, this leaves some communities in California, including Santa Rosa, with considerable unmet need for homeowners who are rebuilding. In terms of public infrastructure, California's CDBG DR Action Plan allocates 3% at a total of $3.5 million for the entire state to aid unmet need for public infrastructure. However, Santa Rosa alone has significant greater need for recovery of public infrastructure, with its projected local cost share for the repair of the damaged infrastructure over $11 million. In addition to the local match requirement for FEMA public assistance projects, there are several large infrastructure projects needed due to the 17 wildfires, including street repairs, street tree removal, repair to the sidewalks in one particular area, and restoration to neighborhood parks. The estimated cost for these projects is more than $20 million. My amendment aims to help close this gap by providing the additional monies in community development funds for the 2017 federal declared disasters. Continued support from the federal government is essential as residents seek to rebuild and my district continues its long-term recovery. I thank you, and I yield a minute to my colleague, Ms. Torres from California.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the gentleman from California for yielding and for being such a great leader in helping those impacted by the devastating California wildfires. The numbers are devastating. Nearly 2 million acres burned, upwards of $3.5 billion in damage, 8,500 individual fires, 98 civilians killed, 6 firefighters killed, and over 11,000 homes destroyed. With climate change only making things worse, we must help California rebuild because this is just the beginning. Rainstorms will now further ravage communities, causing mudslides and flooding. The amendment I have offered with Representative Thompson begins that rebuilding process by increasing funding for the Community Development Fund by $50 million. specifically for those communities that were hardest hit in the previous year. And I thank gentleman for his work on this, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentlewoman for yielding back. I'd like to thank the chair of the subcommittee, Chairman Price, for all of his help and yield him the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields. The floor recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina.
Madam Chair, we have no objection to this amendment and in fact urge its adoption. The amendment ensures that states and territories that have suffered from natural disasters in 2017 are made whole with respect to increased costs to repair public infrastructure. And I yield back the remainder of the time.
The gentleman from California.
I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Is there a member that claims time in opposition to the amendment? The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 9, printed in Part B of the House Report 116-2. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 9, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-2, offered by Mr. Graves of Louisiana.
Pursuant to House Resolution 43, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Graves, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, since 1980, we've had about 220 disasters that have cost over $1 billion, that have caused over $1 billion in damages. In fact, when you add all that money up, we have spent about $1.5 trillion in disaster recovery, nearly all of that being emergency spending, adding to our deficit. Now, the thing that we do here in the federal government to help bring an offense to the table, to help address resiliency, is largely the mission of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Projects for flood protection, for water management, for ecosystem restoration that can help improve the resiliency of our communities. Hurricane protection in my home state of Louisiana. Yet, we have a $100 billion backlog, $100 billion backlog in Corps of Engineer projects across the United States. $100 billion. This Congress provides between $1 and $2 billion a year in construction. Madam Speaker, you can do the math. You have $100 billion in authorized projects. You get $1 to $2 billion a year in construction. You will finish that backlog approximately never. You're not going to finish it. And so what we did in the Disaster Recovery and Reform Act in October, that was signed into law in October and passed through this body 3 times, is we did a provision that says that the FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Grant Program funds, that those funds can be used to build a Corps of Engineers project if your state, if your community determines that's the highest priority. Right now, under Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Funds, there's a prohibition, and this is largely boilerplate language, that prohibits these funds from being used for a Corps of Engineers project. What this amendment does is it simply removes that. If a state, if your community determines that that is the highest priority, that addressing resiliency, telling your community that it's okay to build back here because we're going to make it safer, we're going to prevent you, we're going to reduce the risk, prevent you from having future disaster, future damages. Madam Speaker, right now sitting in the gallery, a group of students from E.D. White High School in my home state of Louisiana. They have a project in their community that has been in the study phase since 1992, and the Corps of Engineers has spent $80 million studying it. That is ridiculous. It's caused billions of dollars in flood damages in this area. This project has not moved forward. We've got to make sure that we're advancing these projects as quickly as we can, improving the resilience of our communities. So this amendment, again, it makes the CDBG-DR funds eligible if your state, if your community determines that's the highest and best value, the best investments of the funds. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Members are reminded to refrain from referencing occupants of the gallery. Does a member claim time in opposition? Seeing none.
Madam Chair, I ask unanimous consent to claim the time in opposition, even though I'm not actually opposed to the amendment.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, this amendment amends a section of the base bill that sets out the sequence of assistance for communities seeking relief. The base bill maintained that CDBG-DR funding should be used after grantees sought out funding from FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers to meet any needs that remain. Public Law 105-276 limits the use of CDBG-DR funding to $250,000 per Army Corps of Engineers project, and this provision would not be changed by the amendment. The amendment would allow communities to utilize CDBG-DR funds for a project in advance of FEMA or Corps of Engineers funding. The CDBG-DR funding would still be subject to the usual limitations on duplication of benefits. I have some concern that the amendment's language is ambiguous with respect to the phrase "in excess of the authorized amount of the project." I assume that the gentleman means that the authorized amount by FEMA or the Army Corps respectively, and not an amount authorized by HUD. I'd like to yield to the gentleman if he'll respond and confirm my understanding.
I appreciate the gentleman's question, and certainly there is no intention under the provision as written to appropriate or provide more funds than is authorized under the existing act or allocated to that state or county or parish or what have you. In addition, obviously, there would be no intention under the provision to spend more money than the project's actually authorized for, because you couldn't build a project more than once. So I hope that was responsive to the gentleman's question.
The question is, though, authorized by whom?
Madam Chair, the chairman brings up a good point, in that is the authorized amount, the full authorized amount that the federal law for a Corps of Engineers project provides. For example, if Congress authorized a flood protection project for $100 million, could they possibly get more than $100 million? The answer to that question is no. The second question to attempt to clarify would be, if a community is allocated $50 million through the CDBG-DR program, would it be possible for them to spend more than $50 million on the project? And once again, to the chairman's question, the answer would be no. This would not intend to obligate or in any way spend more money than it's allocated to them under CDBG-DR or under the authorized project in federal law.
So when the amendment states the phrase "in excess of the authorized amount of the project," can I confirm that the gentleman is saying that you mean the authorized amount by FEMA or the Army Corps, and not the authorized amount by HUD?
Yes, absolutely. That's the intention, is that we would not exceed the authorized amount of the project authorized by the Corps, by FEMA. As I indicated, we couldn't build a project more than once, so whatever that authorized level is in federal law, in existing federal law, that would apply.
I thank the gentleman. Given that understanding, the amendment is a modest change to the existing program, and we have no objection. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Graves.
I want to thank the gentleman from North Carolina and thank the Rules Committee for making this in order. With that, yield back and balance my time. Urge adoption.
The gentleman yields. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Louisiana. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 10, printed in Part B of House Report 116-2. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 10, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-2, offered by Mr. Richmond of Louisiana.
Pursuant to House Resolution 43, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana.
Madam Chair, I rise today to offer a simple bipartisan amendment. This amendment would ensure that language in the bill conforms with current law. All of us who represent areas around the country that have experienced natural disasters know how difficult and complicated the recovery process can be. Last Congress, we came together to pass the Disaster Recovery Reform Act, a bipartisan bill that made key changes to improve how we respond after disasters and also make recovery an easier process. One of those changes was a provision outlining a better way to handle concerns over duplication of benefits after a disaster. It created a process that allows for greater flexibility to respond to the unique situations that occur after every disaster. It is important to my constituents and anyone dealing with the effects of a natural disaster that this administration has clear instructions and that they can readily act on what Congress has instructed them to do. The language of this amendment eliminates the risk of any confusion over what process the administration should follow. Madam Speaker, this is just another attempt by my colleague and I from Louisiana who have unfortunately had the benefit of surviving through a number of natural disasters and just trying to make it easier for our constituents to navigate the process and difficulty of FEMA and recovery. So what this amendment does is help every area that will have a disaster deal with the question of duplication of benefits, and with that, I would urge adoption of the amendment. Oh, I'm sorry, you
reserve? Does the gentleman reserve? Or
I would yield to the chairman.
the gentleman yields to from North Carolina.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I'm happy to express support for his amendment. The amendment would clarify that HUD should follow existing law when it comes to duplication of benefits with respect to SBA loans and CDBG-DR grants. This is an issue that needs clarification. It's affected individuals in my home state of North Carolina as well as people in Louisiana, Texas, and other states recovering from recent disasters. I agree we shouldn't be penalizing individuals who take out an SBA loan in good faith and then later discover that that makes them no longer eligible for a CDBG-DR grant. So I thank the gentleman for the amendment. It's a helpful clarification of our intent, and I have no objection to the amendment.
The gentleman from Louisiana.
I would just offer support for the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. Does a member claim time in opposition?
I rise to claim time in opposition, but I don't intend to oppose the amendment.
Objection. The floor recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I want to thank my colleague from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond, and the chairman from North Carolina for their help in getting these amendments put together, both the last one and this one. As my good friend from Louisiana indicated, this is the result of lessons learned, unfortunately, from countless disasters in our home state. What this does is it assures conformity between this appropriations bill and law, as indicated, the Disaster Recovery and Reform Act that was signed into law in October, to ensure, and let me be clear, Madam Chair, that bill passed the House of Representatives 3 times, the last time by voice vote, and I think the second to last time it passed with maybe 12 opposing votes in this entire body, not because of this provision. None of those opposing votes had anything to do with this provision. But what it does, it simply says, in the aftermath of a disaster, if you applied for a loan, that doesn't make you ineligible for grants that anyone else can apply for. We shouldn't penalize people for leaning forward, being proactive, and seeking loans and tell them later they can't be eligible for a grant. The alternative is they stay in a FEMA-supplied hotel room, incurring taxpayers more cost, and it delays recovery. So what Mr. Richmond's provision does is it ensures conformity to the changes in law that occurred in October in this appropriations bill. The duplication of benefits is applied in a consistent manner. I want to thank him for his continued leadership on this issue and working together, and I urge adoption of the amendment. Yield back.
Gentleman yields. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Louisiana. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 11, printed in Part B of House Report 116-2. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 11, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-2, offered by Mr. Westerman of Arkansas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 43, the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Westerman, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arkansas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to first thank my colleague from California, Representative Panetta, for his co-sponsorship of this bipartisan amendment, and I also like to thank Representative McCollum from Minnesota for her support of this amendment. Madam Speaker, this amendment simply adds $10 million to the state and private forestry fund. And the purpose of this is to prevent some of these catastrophic wildfires that we've been seeing over the past few years. What we have here is a map that shows what the Forest Service has delineated as the wildland-urban interface. This is where forestry and urban areas intersect, and this is where we have potential for significant loss of property and lives. There are already programs in place to manage these wildland-urban interfaces, and what we hope to do with this additional appropriation is just to help the state forestry units manage these areas better. We talk a lot in Congress about federal lands and how we need to manage those, but across the country, over half of all forest land is owned by private forest landowners. There's literally millions of these private forest landowners, many of them owning very small parcels of forest land, and they have really no incentive to manage them to help stop the spread of catastrophic wildfire. What the state and private forestry program does is allows state foresters to go in and help these private landowners to understand how to manage their forest and give them the assistance they need so that we can make these wildland-urban interfaces safer places. If we managed everything perfect on the federal lands in these wildland-urban interfaces, you've still got the issue of all the private lands. The map shows wildland-urban interfaces in places like we would expect out in California and other western states, but because of the population density, we see a lot of these wildland-urban interfaces are in the east where there is more dense populations. So these funds, although rather small in relation to this huge bill, matter of fact, they make up only 0.08% of the total funds in this bill, would have a huge impact all across the country in making our communities more resilient to catastrophic wildfire, and would really help to save property and lives in the future, and would also save a lot of future disaster supplemental funding that the federal government would have to dish out. So again, we're just asking for this amendment to help state and private forests with a $10 million plus up to their funds. And with that, I would like to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Panetta.
Gentleman has 2 minutes remaining.
I'll yield the gentleman 1 minute.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Westerman, for all of your work on this. Madam Speaker, our amendment would provide $10 million in additional funding to the U.S. Forest Service and its state and private forestry account. The account is set up to help state and local landowners recover from damages caused by wildfires and to provide more resources for proactive forest management. What we've seen, unfortunately, in the last few years is that we've seen a number of horrific fires throughout our nation, and especially where I'm from, on California and the central coast of California. But what we know is that we must do something about it. This amendment does something about it by providing the necessary resources to maintain certain areas in which human beings are living close to forests, and therefore making sure that there are certain requirements that are met by the local entities. But we can do this without sacrificing our environmental protections. This is why we're basically able to increase resources for wildfire mitigation practices, such as prescribed burns, maintenance of fuel banks, and technical assistance to landowners. And we can make sure that they're advanced, but we can also, that they can also be in compliance with environmental safeguards. We can do both, and this amendment and this amount of money does that. And so I would continue to ask for support of this amendment and urge my colleagues to vote yea on this.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Arkansas has 1 minute left.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to yield 45 seconds to the gentlewoman from Minnesota, Ms. McCollum.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Minnesota.
Madam Chair, a point of parliamentary inquiry. I could ask for unanimous consent and rise in opposition, even though I'm not opposed to the bill, claim 5 minutes, and then the gentleman could have time to close.
The gentlewoman is correct.
So I leave that to the gentleman. You have a minute remaining, Madam Chair, if you'd like to use it now, and then I'll use my own time. Thank you.
Does the gentleman from Arkansas reserve your time?
I reserve my time.
Member wish to rise in opposition and claim time in opposition to the amendment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I ask unanimous consent to rise in opposition, even though I'm not opposed to this amendment.
Objection. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Minnesota.
Thank you. The supplemental appropriation that we're discussing today includes $8.24 million for the U.S. Forestry Service to work on disaster relief. And it includes $2 million for state and private forestry. And as I've told the members here, I totally support the gentleman's proposal to increase the amount, and they've done an excellent job describing why it's so important. As wildfires continue to increase in both frequency and intensity as a result of climate change, we need to do more to prevent them. The state private forestry programs bring together state, tribes, and local governments and gives them the tools that they need to protect communities and our environment from wildfires. And I have seen firsthand, and I have spoken to people who've used these programs, and they are money well worth spent to prevent wildland fires. But however, in order for the Forestry Service to be able to use these critical funds, I will be supporting the CR portion of this bill to reopen the government. Because without this continuing resolution, the agencies won't be able to receive funds to get to work immediately. So, Madam Chair, with that, I yield back any remaining time. Thank you.
The gentlewoman yields back the remainder of her time. Does the gentleman wish to be recognized for the remainder of his time?
Yes, I wish to make the closing. And,
gentleman is recognized.
So, Madam Speaker, this bill again would help state and private forests. It would help to reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfire. It's sound environmentally, and it's a good investment for the federal government. And with that, I close and yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arkansas. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Yes, she's going. It is now in order to consider amendment number 12, printed in Part B of House Report 116-2. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Washington seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 12, Part B of House Report number 116-2, offered by Ms. Jayapal of Washington.
Pursuant to House Resolution 43, the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Jayapal, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Washington.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My amendment would simply make clear to the Department of Homeland Security that these funds, which Congress is specifically dedicating to the Coast Guard's environmental remediation efforts as a result of hurricane damage, cannot be reprogrammed to increase DHS's detention capacity. Madam Speaker, this amendment is critical. Just a few months ago, we learned that DHS transferred $169 million from other agencies to U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement to detain and remove people. $10 million of that money came from FEMA, diverting funds from the Disaster Relief Agency at the start of the hurricane season when Hurricane Florence was heading towards the East Coast. $1.8 million of that diverted money came from the Domestic Nuclear Detention Office. $29 million was taken out from the Coast Guard's budget. And over $34 million came from several TSA programs. That is simply unacceptable. ICE continues to spend far above its appropriated funding to detain people, but these funds are being transferred from other critical agencies in clear violation of congressionally mandated funding.
As of January 1st, more than 48,000 people were being held in ICE custody, even though they only have funding appropriated by Congress to detain 40,520 people. In the last Appropriations Act passed by this chamber, we provided funding to ICE with the understanding that the funding amount would, quote, require ICE to reduce the number of detention beds, end quote, in use before the end of the year. We clearly stated our intent to ICE, and yet ICE has chosen to ignore the mandates of the United States Congress again and again. Moreover, the Government Accountability Office has found a number of inconsistencies and errors in ICE's own calculations for its congressional budget justifications. While ICE officials stated their budget documents undergo multiple reviews to ensure accuracy, ICE was not able to provide any documentation of such reviews. And the GAO concluded, again, this is a quote, that ICE is not positioned to ensure the credibility of its budget requests. If the GAO concludes that ICE is not positioned to ensure the credibility of its own requests, then we need to be doing a job of checking for accuracy and ensuring and exercising oversight. And most of all, we need to make sure that these funds that are being appropriated for disaster relief stay for disaster relief. Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Woman reserves.
Claim time in opposition.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Idaho
Claim time
seek
in opposition
recognition?
to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the gentlewoman. First of all, there are no funds in this bill to expand or build detention facilities. There are no funds in this bill to expand or build detention facilities. There are no funds in this bill to expand or build detention facilities. But let me get this straight. See if I've got it straight. We don't want to enhance border security to stop people from coming across the border illegally. We've got immigration courts being overrun. And we don't want to have the necessary facilities to keep those people because they can't get into the immigration courts right away. What exactly do you want us to do? Just because Congress says, hey, we're only giving you funding for 40,000 people. What if 100,000 people come across the border illegally? What do you expect us to do? You have no answers. Except, no, don't detain them. Just let them go. I know how we can reduce the cost of prisons in this country. Let's only appropriate enough money to house 100,000 prisoners, regardless of the crimes they committed or anything else. We're only going to fund 100,000. Above that, just let them go. I don't get it. I don't know where the heck we're coming from on this. All this does is put another poison pill in this bill that will make it much more difficult to pass and will ensure that the Senate will never take it up, which I doubt they will anyway. To me, I just don't understand what the heck's going on here. We all know what the answer to this shutdown is. Every one of us in our heart know what the answer is. It's a compromise. And a compromise means both sides give some and get some. That's the nature of a compromise. That means there's going to be parts in it that I don't like, but I'm going to end up voting for it. That means there's going to be parts in it you don't like, but you need to end up voting for it. So anyway, we need to get back to opening this government and quit putting these poison pills and this nonsense in this bill. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Members are reminded to address their remarks to the chair. The gentlewoman has half minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm going to yield to my colleague in just a second, but this should be easy to vote for because you yourself said there's nothing in here that provides funding for detention. So I look forward to seeing the gentleman vote for my amendment because actually, then you're saying there's no problem here. We're going to make sure that these funds actually go where they're supposed to disaster relief. That's all I'm saying in this amendment, is let's make sure that the funds we appropriate go to disaster relief, which is necessary in states across the country, certainly in my part of the country, wildfires, hurricanes. We have lots of issues we got to deal with here. And so, given that the gentleman just started his remarks with multiple statements saying there's nothing in this bill that would allow for this, I look forward to seeing your yes votes on my amendment. And with that, Madam Speaker, I'd like to yield a minute to my colleague from New York, Mr. Espaillat.
Members are again reminded to address their remarks to the chair, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, thank you. I rise in support of this amendment and want to thank Mr. Jayapal for allowing me some time to speak in his support. As she outlined, this amendment would restrict the Department of Homeland Security from using any emergency funds from being reprogrammed to add beds at immigration detention centers. Last year, during a historic hurricane season that ravaged Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and parts of Texas, the White House brazenly shifted millions of dollars slated for recovery to Immigration and Customs Enforcement in order to fund the immoral detention of refugees and other immigrants as part of its horrible zero-tolerance policy. Throughout the Gulf Coast, but especially in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, there is still tremendous amount of work to be done. Businesses must reopen, power infrastructure needs to be restored and made more resilient, and communities must be rebuilt. Yet President Trump is threatening to declare a phony national emergency so he can take these critical funds and put them towards a useless medieval wall and other components of his cruel immigration policies. I am happy to support this amendment, Madam Chair, and I yield back the remaining part of my time.
The gentlewoman has 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Speaker, let me just say how pleased I am that we're on the same page that disaster relief funding should go to disaster relief. It should not go to expanding detention beds, which are already over-subscribed, and so I hope that the other side will be happy to vote yes on this amendment. And I would just say we're happy to have a discussion about immigration and all of the things we need to do to reform our immigration system at the right time. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and with that I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentleman is recognized.
How much time do I have?
2 minutes.
I would just say that the argument I've just heard is kind of ridiculous. If we're going to do, what we're going to do is list everything this bill can't be, funds this can't be spent on, I don't think we should be able to give any of this money to NASA to put a man on the moon. We could list everything that the federal government does except these things and say we've got to specify it in the bill. No, this is a poison pill. And again, I didn't hear an answer. What do you expect to do when these people come across the border illegally? What if they're waiting for hearings and stuff, and the courts are just being flooded? There are no answers. You have no answers. This is a bad amendment, just trying to make a statement. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. Members are reminded to address their remarks to the chair. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Washington. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Now, in order to consider amendment number 13, printed in Part B of House Report 116-2. For what purpose does the gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 13, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-2, offered by Mr. Sablan of the Northern Mariana Islands.
Pursuant to House Resolution 43, the gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands, Mr. Sablan, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise today to offer an amendment that increases funding for the Marianas Medicaid Block Grant. Our islands were struck by 2 catastrophic weather events late last year. Typhoon Mangkhut made landfall September 10, and on September 29, the President declared a major disaster for the islands of Saipan, Tinian, and Rota. While recovery from Mangkhut was still ongoing, Super Typhoon Yutu, the second most powerful storm ever in United States history, struck. Yutu caused widespread destruction of homes, businesses, public facilities, and infrastructures. On October 26, the President declared the second major disaster for our islands. U2 also brought death. Never in anyone's memory has typhoon caused death in our islands, but one person died during U2 and another in a storm-related accident. Over 130 people were injured. Our only hospital, which has just 75 beds, packed people into the emergency room to stitch up wounds, remove glass and flying debris from legs and arms and faces, and attend to those that needed dialysis or other treatment while waiting days for power to be restored. Medicaid provides 1/4 of the revenues for the hospital and health insurance for 30% of our population. But there's a cap on how much Medicaid funding is available to the Marianas. When a storm strikes, the program has to steal from tomorrow to pay for today. The disaster appropriation the House passed on December 21, generous though it was, provided no money for Medicaid for the Marianas. Chairman Lowy, recognizing the lapse, added $20 million in H.R. 268 for the Marianas Medicaid program to be available for the rest of the year. After her bill was drafted, however, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, informed appropriations staff that the Marianas can actually use $36 million in the wake of the typhoons. Following that advice from CMS, I'm offering an amendment that adds $16 million to the original bill, bringing total assistance for the rest of the year to the recommended $36 million. I ask my colleagues for their support of my amendment and of the underlying bill, H.R. 268, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman reserves. Does a member claim time in opposition to the amendment? Seeing none, the gentleman from the Northern Marianas.
Madam Chair, again, the $36 million I'm requesting by adding $16 million to the $20 million already in the bill is what CMS told Chairman Lowy's staff the Marianas can spend this year in the aftermath of Typhoon Mangkhut and Super Typhoon U2. And I'd like to ask for unanimous consent to insert into the record a recent news report from Something to Nothing in the Honolulu Civil bid. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's request will be covered under general leave.
I hold back. I yield 1 minute to the gentle lady from Connecticut.
The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I rise in support of Mr. Sablan's amendment, and as chair of the Labor HHS Education Subcommittee, I believe we must ensure Americans can access vital health programs, especially in times of dire need. Yet after terrible typhoons, Americans in the Northern Marianas could see Medicaid run out. Unlike states, territories have finite pools of Medicaid funding. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services estimates the Northern Marianas need $36 million to maintain care for Medicaid patients, up from $20 million, which we provided in the underlying bill. Mr. Sablan's amendment would provide that additional $16 million. We have an obligation to help Americans in Middletown, Connecticut, and yes, the Northern Marianas access Medicaid as well, especially when they need it the most. So I strongly support the amendment and yield back.
Woman yields. The gentleman from Northern Marianas.
Madam Chair, I have no further statements to make. I yield back my time and I ask for support of my amendment and the underlying bill, H.R. 268.
Thank you. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 14, printed in Part B of the House Report 116-2. For what purpose does the gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 14, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-2, offered by Mr. Sablan of the Northern Mariana Islands.
Pursuant to House Resolution 43, the gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands, Mr. Sablan, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from the Northern Marianas.
Madam Chair, my second amendment to this supplemental appropriation increases emergency food assistance for the Marianas. As I explained earlier, our islands were struck by not one, but two typhoons last year, one right after another. Typhoon Mangkhut and Super Typhoon Yutu, the second most powerful storm ever in U.S. history. While the first 30 days after Yutu, our local food stamp program had incurred costs of $10.2 million. That money helped families replace the food they lost in the storms when their homes lost roofs, water poured in, and electricity and refrigeration were cut off. Over 40,000 people out of our total population of 54,000 received help in that first month, according to the Department of Agriculture's Food and Nutrition Service. H.R. 268 replaces that first month's expenditure with an appropriation of $10.2 million. I thank Chairman Lowy for recognizing the need. But beyond that first month of emergency, more is needed. The Marianas is not part of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. Instead, we receive a block grant from the federal government. With the block grant, there is no reserve, as with SNAP. When disaster strikes, not only is money used up faster than planned on the front end, future costs also rise until families get back on their feet. We have no official projection of the ongoing costs because agriculture employees are furloughed. But just before the lights went out, my staff learned that about 20% of the people who received food assistance right after the storm were expected to remain eligible. And if these projections hold true, those caseloads will double from 3,000 households to 6,000 households. The $15 million in my amendment will provide a little over 6 months of funding for those newly eligible households until their incomes can recover. And if $15 million proves too generous, which I very much doubt, the Secretary has authority to grant only as much as needed to respond to the disaster caused by Typhoon Mangkhut and Super Typhoon Yutu. I ask my colleagues for their support of my amendment and of H.R. 268, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. Does a member claim time in opposition to the amendment? The gentleman from Northern Marianas.
Madam Chair, again, because the Marianas is not part of SNAP, there is no contingency funding to absorb the cost of this disaster. With more families eligible for assistance, unless we make more funds available, benefits will have to be cut across the board. This is not a right way to respond when people are trying to put their lives back together so they can support themselves and their families again. I ask my colleagues to support my amendment making another $15 million available so these families have enough food. I urge your support for the underlying bill as well, and I yield the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. In order to consider amendment number 15, printed in Part B of the House Report 116-2. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Puerto Rico seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
Does the gentlewoman from Puerto Rico rise as the designee of the gentlewoman from American Samoa?
Yes, I rise as a designee of Amata Radhawagan from American Samoa in support of her amendment number 15.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 15, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-2, offered by Ms. Gonzalez Colon of Puerto Rico.
Pursuant to House Resolution 43, the gentlewoman from Puerto Rico, Ms. Gonzalez Colon, and a member opposed to each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Puerto Rico.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And today I rise as a designee of Congresswoman Amata Radhawagan from American Samoa for offering the amendment to increase the nutritional assistance funding amount of the bill by $5 million so the bill can include American Samoa in the emergency appropriation due to the damages caused by Cyclone Gita in February of last year. The entire 100-mile-per-hour winds of Cyclone Gita wipe out an entire growing season for the American Samoa people in rural communities, which largely depends on subsistence in farming. Staple crops of bananas, breadfruit, and taro were lost wholesale, which led to enormous drain on the island's malnutritional assistance grant. These funds are vital to sustain the basic local population and help fulfill the basic nutritional assistance needs of the American Samoa population. By approving this amendment, approximately 6,000 people in the territory will benefit and will have a greater access to food security. And I do believe that including American Samoa in the disaster bill will do what the people need in that island. I ask for your support for this emergency provision to benefit the people of American Samoa on behalf of Congresswoman Amata Radhawagan. With that, I reserve the balance of the time.
The gentlewoman reserves. Does a member seek to claim time in opposition to the amendment? Seeing no member at this time, the gentlewoman from Puerto Rico.
I yield back the balance of the time.
The gentlewoman yields back the balance of her time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Puerto Rico. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I ask unanimous consent that the request for a recorded vote on my amendment be withdrawn to the end that the chair put the question de novo.
The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 6, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-2, offered by Mr. Stewart of Utah.
Is there objection to the request of the gentleman from Utah? Without objection, so ordered. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Utah. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. What's next? Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, the unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment number 2, printed in Part B of House Report 116-2 by the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-2, offered by Mr. McGovern of Massachusetts.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for the recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. There will be a 15-minute vote.
The House wraps up general and